Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with X4. After Emma, Logan, Kurt, and Remy all got powers like those of the FF, and it kinda messed them up, they had to be corralled, and it was kind of a hassle. Logan especially. Not making things better was a shuttlecraft full of alien brood that the Storm siblings and Storm had to safely land in the heart of the city. On top of that, Beast is trying some risky procedure to cure his friends. And that's when more brood show up. This is why we need giant do not disturb signs orbiting the planet at all times. It's at least worth a try.
The cover is pretty good, if a little ambiguous. It's a stylized collection of the heroes involved in various sizes and placements, all looking very earnest or somber or even depressed in some points. Not technically bad, but could have worked the same for any of the previous covers. We open to a 2-page spread of Cyclops, Storm, Invisible Woman, and Human Torch taking on some brood, some of which apparently have wings. I don't know much about this alien species. I've mostly known them to kind of skitter and crawl around, so this is probably less surprising to some other readers. Anyway, we see that Ben is in Times Square as well. I guess he could have flown there, but as far as the pacing goes, he just kind of shows up after having been in Reed's lab at the end of issue 4.
You know, where we saw Psyche and Reed kind of switch places through an artist mishap? Though, if we go back to the lab and Ben is still there, maybe it's not a mistake and Reed is actually dipping his stretchy hand in cloning.
The bugs just won't stop, and the heroes are spreading themselves too thin, so Scott formulates a plan. Storm will fly him to the approaching swarm, taking the fight to them while those on the ground pick off any that survive landfall. As they say on the football field, I'm about to go long.
I'm no football expert, but isn't that something said to someone intended to receive a pass? In this case, Cyclops is the one being passed to the brood. Or you could say that Psyche is the one passing the brood to the others. Am I wrong here, or is the metaphor just plain muddled?
Slim is taken to the skies via Air Monroe and lets loose with his optic blast to a degree he rarely does. The brood that hit the ground survive, but the Fantastic Three-Quarters makes short work of them. I know that Sue is constructing an invisible field shaped like a box so her little brother can roast the little buggers, 'cause, you know, Johnny is the Human Torch. But the detailing makes it look like the brood are in some kind of giant, horrific novelty ice cube.
There's a fly in my drink. I put it there. You did? I slipped it into your glass as a gag.
Back in the lab, Reed is watching the fight, which is just a cropped copy of the opening pages, as Beast is wondering how they'll manage to stop the invading horde even if they do manage to cure their friends. Reed tells him to have faith, then begins to doubt himself. Things are looking good to return Nightcrawler and the others to normal, but it makes Richards question if he's done enough to cure Ben Grimm. Beast reminds him that the current circumstances are different, what with the X gene preventing the effects of the cosmic storm from becoming permanent. It's possible the Thing might lose faith in Stretcho, but equally possible that he begins to hope again. So they begin the complicated and risky procedure of firing lasers at the stasis tubes of the transformed X-Men. Little simplistic, but okay. A moment later, the tubes break, presumably freeing them all, but we naturally focus mostly on Wolverine,
who has had bad experiences with being stuck in vats of science water. Also, wouldn't them aggressively busting out on their own be kind of a bad sign? I mean, Logan did just pop out growling, so how can you tell it worked?
Back in Times Square, the brood are closing in with little signs of slowing down. Good thing that's the moment Beast and some restored X-Men show up to tag in, with more sports metaphors. At least it works better this time. Gambit charges an entire car for Ben to throw, which is cool, if probably not insured. And Sue literally throws Logan to the horde. I mean, it was his idea, so it's all good. Nightcrawler apparently stopped at the mansion to grab his sword.
Because I don't think the brood would have been beaten by reading from scripture. Well, if you had meant it like that, I think it would have come up in the Sermon on the Mount or something.
Psyche takes out some flyers by blasting the top of a building, maybe to justify this weird bring down the house line he cracks. then asks Hank why Emma isn't around. She's fine, but Reed needed her for his plan against the invasion. A plan that the rich snob thinks is too stupid to work as we go to the X Mansion, specifically the Cerebra Chamber. Richards has enhanced the range of the machine, and Frost asks if he was going to do this mod anyway, why didn't he do it in the first place? Save everyone the trouble of going to the space station. It's explained that the satellite would still be unreachable, whereas the Akanti are well within Earth's atmosphere, and vulnerable to the last solid option they have to save Earth.
The exchange kind of preemptively fixes a potential plot hole, but it sort of makes Emma seem dumber than she should be. And I say that as someone who, again, never cared for her or how she hooked up with Scott.
We go to the, bridge of one of the Akanti creatures, which looks awfully mechanical for a biological being, but whatever, where the Brood are certain they'll wear their enemies down soon enough, only for something else to stand in their way. Something that dooms the planet they'd intended to invade and forces one rather different-looking Brood to order a full retreat of their forces. Galactus and the Phoenix, right in the middle of the city.
Each was tricked into thinking the other was going to apologize for some disagreement they had in the past. And hopefully, this will help work out their differences and reunite their White Snake cover band.
With two such powerful forces focused on each other, the Brood figure they can escape. When it looks like each one is about to attack the space bugs, they hasten their way back to the ships and get the heck out of space dodge. This leaves our heroes pretty confused since they don't seem to see any gigantic intergalactic boogeymen, or boogie birds. But Sue catches on that Reed had a part in the exodus. Short time later, as cleanup begins, Reed and White Queen fly in, with accolades belonging to both teams for their joint efforts in driving off their foes. Frost sort of admits she was wrong about the psychically induced hallucinations in the Brood's more simplistic brains. I do find that was a clever plan, but I'm wondering if just one of those two would have been just as effective, or maybe they were just hedging their bets. Ben chooses now to ask Logan how his adamantium managed to stretch the way it did when he was changed. Clean living, bub.
I avoid it at all costs. I smoke, drink, sleep in my own filth, go to the hospital nurseries to shout obscenities at the newborns, and leave negative reviews online for products I've never bought.
McCoy chimes in it's still a valid question, even though Wolverine wouldn't be able to answer it, and that the extent to which the unique phenomena affected the mutants deserves further study. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek way for him to signal Reed to talk to Ben about this, confront any feelings he has on the matter, and Grimm takes it in stride. He understands that the cure was possible in part because of the X gene. I'm guessing Beast mentioned that off-panel, and he'll get his own cure in due time, because the ever-loving blue-eyed thing trusts his best friend. For now, it's time to do some serious cleanup and get people back in the city. Days later, the FF have been invited to a mainstay in the X-Comics, a friendly game of baseball. In the stands, Susan pushes Emma to admit the recent adventure changed her. Aside from the obvious molecular level, she can tell something is different by the way she's watching her team play. And Frost confesses it's nice to know you're not alone, that there are people who will be there for you no matter the danger. To which Susan replies, that's what it means to be a family.
That was X4, and it was a pretty fun read. It certainly has some problems, but none that I think tear it down too badly.
Sometimes the dialogue got very quippy, and I don't mind quippy, but there are times where it just didn't need to be there. Take some of it out and it'll either change nothing about the mood, or it might improve by the line's absence. It could have depended on who was saying what, because there were several times the Thing's dialogue made me smile, mostly in conjunction with clobbering someone. There were a few moments that felt kind of puzzling, like Reed's explanation for Wolverine getting elasticity powers, where the others made more sense. Or when he was warning Beast about radiation, it seemed like Hank was going to use himself as a test subject or something, because he was kind of also one with a secondary mutation, but they kind of yada-yada the whole thing, never getting into much detail about how secondary mutations played a part in the cure. Then there's the very end, where it's implied Emma had some kind of character arc.
Which seems pretty mild if it exists at all. She never really changed her attitude. No time for the reader to see that her experiences or the threat had changed her in any way. She maintained her usual stuck-up superior attitude throughout the story. But we got a special message about the meaning of family at the end, even though it felt pretty tacked on.
I'm not saying there aren't examples to support it, but it didn't feel as well built as it could have been if that's what they were going for. I feel they definitely should have swapped some of the covers, like make 2's the cover for issue 3, and that would have been less spoilery. That being said, I rather liked the art. It was different in a good way, very distinct from other styles, even if there were some odd teleporting involved in issue 4. I thought the stakes were raised and paced pretty well, from a rescue mission to a crisis that forces the heroes against each other, and then a full-on invasion.
It's the kind of story I miss seeing in some ways. The threat does end up being big, but the story never fools itself into thinking it's some epic game changer or that it needs to be.
What I think is kind of a growing problem with comics today, be that events or multi-issue arcs, is that some writers take very simple premises and try to make them seem deeper or more grandiose than they actually are or need to be. They'll either have the threat be enormous over and over, or they'll try and make every minor interaction between characters feel like destiny, or possibly making the slightest, most basic mood a person can have laid up as monumental. Some writers seem so full of themselves they end up going off the rails. Some would try and convince you that Beast's foot, being barely in this cover, portends to grand things in his role in the story, but it doesn't. This comic isn't full of itself. It's not desperately trying to change the status quo or make you question everything about these characters so the people behind it can pretend they're more intellectual than they really are. It knows what it is, a fun superhero adventure, and it doesn't boast to be anything more than that. It does introduce some ideas and concepts that are certainly interesting, like if there's an elemental basis for the FF's powers, but it acknowledges that that's not definitive. The very concept of what if the X-Men had the same abilities as the Fantastic Four feels a little fanfic-like, but it works because the story is self-contained and never feels like it erroneously thinks it deserves to replace canon or attempt to establish a grandiose new standard when it doesn't even have the foundation for it. Overall, while it could have used a bit more smoothing out in some areas, it's still an enjoyable read. It's not going to change the universe, but it doesn't need to, and much of the time, that's far better.
Next week is the season finale, where maybe, just maybe, what I hoped for when I reviewed Golem of Gotham will be fulfilled. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, I hope Batman gonna punch some Nazis.